everyone, it's Hannah. I hope you're ready to get into part 2 of our Barriers to a Career in Science video series. The second part is going to focus on racial barriers. Before we start getting into it, I think it's really important that I take a moment to talk out some of the challenges of me being a white person discussing racial barriers in STEM. I should also note that, like my previous video, I may be more obviously reading off a script than you are used to, and I apologize for that. So I want to start by saying, my experience offers me many privileges, especially when it comes to my race, but this doesn't stop me from wanting to learn, understand, and support other underrepresented groups in STEM. As a white scientist, I faced no racial barriers when entering my field of chemistry, and for this reason, the examples that I will present in this video are primarily quotes from others' experiences and data from studies. And I want to acknowledge that this was a particularly hard part of this discussion for me to write, as I have not experienced these things myself, and I do not want to misrepresent or omit important points. I worry about both not giving credit for someone's words, but also posting their name in this manner, because many people of color feel uncomfortable publicly reporting racist incidents when retaliation by white perpetrators is not uncommon at all. Lastly, I do not want to muddy these points by presenting them in a white saviory sort of way. If you have not heard of the term before, a white savior is someone who attempts to help people of color, but in a self-serving manner, which also misunderstands the group's needs and perspectives, like in this late night show clip. Thank you, Erin Kate. So to summarize, I know it is awkward to hear a white person explaining racial issues, but this is a challenge that I and all of us need to take on to support our colleagues of color. To start the discussion on racial barriers, I will highlight the importance of how racial biases and discrimination start in early education. Early classroom experiences initiate a student's relationship with formal education, but unfortunately, national data suggests that racial bias affects student-teacher relationships as early as preschool. In a 2016 study, Dr. Walter Gilliam of the Yale Child Study Center set out to address why black preschoolers in the United States are about 3.5 times more likely to be suspended than white preschoolers. The study was performed on 135 educators recruited from an education conference and had 2 parts. In the first part, educators were primed to believe a 6-minute video would contain challenging behavior, though it did not, and asked to press a keypad when such behavior was detected. Eye tracking indicated that participants spent a disproportionate amount of time observing the black boy. Additionally, 42% of participants self-reported that the black boy required most of their attention. In the second part of the study, participants read a vignette which contained a fake profile on a preschool student with behavioral problems with a randomized racially identifying name: Latoya, Emily, Deshawn, or Jake. They were asked to pretend this child was in their classroom and rank between 1 and 5 the severity of the child's behavior. The behavioral traits on the vignette included things like stealing toys, pushing, hitting, and name-calling. They found that the white educators rate behavioral problems on paper as less severe when the name indicated blackness. The authors found this to be consistent with the shifting standards theory. Essentially, white educators anticipated behavioral problems from black children, particularly black boys, and thus held them to a lower behavioral standard than white children. The authors conclude, perhaps white early education staff tend to hold an implicit bias that black preschoolers are more likely to engage in challenging classroom behaviors, so a vignette about a black child with challenging behaviors is not appraised as being unusual, severe, or out of the ordinary, resulting in lower behavioral ratings. An unsurprising result of educators expecting black children to be more likely to exhibit behavioral problems is the troublemaker stereotype. The troublemaker stereotype describes that for the same behavior, students of color on average receive more severe disciplinary action than white students. It is hypothesized that this statistical observation is the result of educators accepting white students' misbehavior to be situational, while students of color's misbehavior as a character trait. Hence, students of color are more likely to be permanently viewed as a troublemaker. A 2015 study out of Stanford supports this hypothesis. In it, 57 kindergarten through 12th grade teachers are given school records from a middle schooler's profile with 2 infractions. Similar to the Yale study, the teachers are given at random a racially identifying name and are asked the severity of the student's offenses as well as what disciplinary action is appropriate. But in this study, they are asked these sequentially after reading both the first and then the second infraction. The results showed that while after reading the first infraction, teachers reported similar responses, after the second infraction, their feelings of concern for maintaining order in their class and suggested disciplinary action was more severe for profiles with black-sounding names than those with white-sounding names. The authors concluded, as predicted, for the black student, the first infraction seemed to influence how the second infraction was regarded. Indeed, our theory held that teachers are more likely to view multiple infractions as a connected pattern when the student is black as opposed to white. I'm going to move on now, but I want to point out that there's no lack of studies on the topic of racial bias in early education. Unfortunately, some white people who consider themselves to be rational skeptics will watch this and argue that I may have cherry-picked studies or that there's not actually that much data on this subject. However, this is just not true. I selected these studies because they were recent, concise, and out of inarguably reputable institutions. I could have added more studies, but the video would just be too long. People think there is no harm in playing devil's advocate, but this adds to the burden on people of color to teach countless white people well-documented sociological phenomena. No one expects white people to understand immediately something that we have no experience with, but skeptics who actually value research should feel motivated to read the abundant literature themselves. So we see that racial bias has a really large impact on student-teacher relationships, but unfortunately, teachers and professors have arguably the largest single-source influence on who gets into science. This is because a career in science requires substantial higher education, at minimum a bachelor's, but most often master's and doctoral degrees. Teachers in middle school and high school determine who is recommended for advanced or honors courses, which in turn impacts college applications. Take, for example, the Wake County public school system in North Carolina. The district recognized that taking algebra by 8th grade was an important milestone to college readiness, but found disproportionately low rates of enrollment in advanced math coursework among Black students, Hispanic students, and students from low-income households. In the 2010-2011 school year, the district moved from a teacher recommendation-based system, which reportedly rests with teachers or counselors who might otherwise make recommendations on the basis of student characteristics, such as race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status, even conditional on demonstrated ability, to a system based on test scores alone. Unsurprisingly, since the district has observed a doubling in math acceleration for Black and Hispanic students. To add, most college applications, both undergraduate and graduate, require multiple recommendations from teachers or professors. Racial bias in letter of recommendation should not come as a surprise, as its impact on hiring practices have been well documented. A particularly well-known type of study is where the same resume is used in multiple employment applications but randomly assigned a Black or white-sounding name. Studies of this kind have undisputably shown preferential hiring of white names, with as much as 50% more callbacks for interviews. Similarly, a 2016 paper used a text analysis software program to analyze 457 undergraduate letters of recommendation for an international research experience. Letters for accepted students use language which, quote, describe the productivity of the students with greater certainty and include a greater number of quotes from student work. Such language was more common in letters for white and male students. Bias in letters of recommendation are only recently being considered, despite there being a long-held practice. As UC Berkeley professor Jerome Karabell chronicles in his book The Chosen, this practice was established by Harvard, Yale, and Princeton in the early 20th century to justify the, quote, rejection of scholastically brilliant boys considered undesirable, and it granted the director of admissions board latitude to admit boys of good background with weak academic records. In her 2019 article, Letters of Recommendation Just Say No, Michelle Iwin of the University of Minnesota addresses similar practices on today's admission committees. For example, she cites a 2018 study which found white admissions counselors in historically white institutions were more responsive to Black prospective students who presented as apolitical than those who shared their social justice and/or anti-racist activism. But her main criticism of Letters of Recommendation is summarized in the following statement. Many students who are first generation, students of color, of low socioeconomic status, non-traditionally aged, or parents do not have the capacity to attend office hours to have an individual dialogue with their professors, to volunteer time in a research lab, to work on honors projects, or to engage in other extracurricular activities that warrant a hyperbolic letter of recommendation. Prospective students from marginalized backgrounds may be just as skilled as more traditional graduate school applicants, but because of their background and the lack of time and opportunity to attain unspoken cultural capital of expected student behavior, they may be unfairly assessed as less prepared or less qualified. To summarize what we've discussed so far, we have seen that racial bias influences student-teacher relationships from early education all the way up until college acceptance. Non-whiteness, and in particular blackness of a student, makes teachers more likely to perceive their classroom conduct as misbehavior, even if it is not, attribute them negative and permanent character traits like being a troublemaker, and give harsher disciplinary action than white students. In addition, teachers are less likely to advance non-white students to college preparatory courses and tend to give non-white students weaker letters of recommendation. These are just some of the racial barriers that students of color, particularly low income, face when pursuing their interest in science in the United States. Now I would like to discuss barriers that students face after college admission. These accounts will thus focus on experiences of scientists of color after admission into an undergraduate program. To start this section off, we'll look at a survey. In 2013, Ohio State surveyed 50 Latino and Black undergraduates in engineering and related STEM fields. The interviews revealed students felt alone and invisible, aware they lacked same-race peers and faculty members, and that they lacked the pre-college preparation others had. This is exemplified in the following quotes. A student named Danny said in his interview, "It's hard, man. Like, I'm in class all by myself as the only black male. And it's hard to relate when you don't see anyone like you ever. That's just the beginning because they can never get my name right. They always call me Dan, Tony, Tyrone, whatever." Another student, Emmanuel, shared his experience when trying to participate in classroom discussions. "Sometimes when you're talking, they be looking at you like, what are you saying? Who does he think he is? Dude, the facial experience when you talk is what the fuck is he about to say? What is this dude about to contribute? We already said everything. He ain't that smart." Lack of representation amongst peers and professors is as much a problem for graduate students as it is for undergrads. Recently, a group of Black scientists and engineers at Caltech presented an institution-wide anti-racism talk in which they pointed out Caltech's serious lack of racial diversity. The U.S. Census Bureau reports that around 13.4% of the country's total population is Black identified, but in a graduate student population of 1,299 this year, only 11 graduate students are Black, meaning that they make up less than 1% of our campus population. In their presentation, BSEC also displayed a plot showing Black graduate student population percentage on campuses of similar academic stature to Caltech. While Caltech is clearly one of the worst offenders, disproportionate Black representation on university campuses is a wide-scale problem that colleges must make an active effort to address. As part of their anti-racism campaign, BSEC has provided a list of actionable items to help diversify Caltech, which I will go into more detail on in the Deconstructing Barriers segment. As I've stated, my perspective is limited, but from what I can see, there's a stark dichotomy between many colleges' desire to appear multicultural on their websites and their actual treatment of students of color once they are on campus. Like the example of the college admissions teams that want Black students, but only when they are perceived as apolitical. I can recall an event at my undergraduate Mills. A Black student group coordinated a Black Lives Matter event one evening in my freshman year, so this was around 2015. The event took place at the same time as a midnight breakfast, a midterm study snack night held in our cafeteria. The student coordinators gathered outside the cafeteria and tried to encourage white and non-Black students of color to join them in their nighttime peaceful protest. I must admit that at the time, I was very ignorant to race-related issues, so I didn't understand the larger context for why such a protest mattered to Black students on campus. Meanwhile, Mills is located in the middle of Oakland, California, one of the most racially segregated areas of the country, a center of economic disparity and police violence. I, a non-participant, watched as Mills administration got on the microphone and told the peacefully assembled students to disperse and end their protest. I reflect on this now as my administration telling the event's organizers in that moment that they did not want the actual perspective Black students brought to campus. I would like to further demonstrate how scientific institutions alienate people of color by reading some experiences from Black academics on a Twitter thread called Black in the Ivory. This thread has really gotten a lot of attention, but I want to highlight it here for those who have not visited yet. For the reasons I previously mentioned on not wanting to endanger Black voices, I chose to remove identifiers from these quotes. Part of the trauma that Black in the Ivory experience is undergoing and/or witnessing abuse, then seeing the people who actively orchestrated the abuse be promoted, awarded, praised. No, my career wasn't handed to me because I am black. I promise you that is not how this works. I earned every bit of what I have accomplished. Yes, people say that. Black in the Ivory. Black in the Ivory is having your funding discussed by your white cis male advisor and colleague. The rationale for your funding and admittance to this woke doctoral program, we just needed another black woman in the room. Black in the Ivory is also seeing departments hire a white already been done based off their perceived trajectory rather than a black PhD who's already proven and accomplished, all while saying they actively promote diversity. Black in the Ivory is finding out that for 18 months I was being paid less than my colleague who was doing the same exact role as me, even though I had more years of experience and academic qualifications. Being that black girl in the lab, yet having to introduce yourself to people 5 separate times before they remember who you are. Hyper visible yet invisible. Black in the Ivory is constantly being asked if I know what the surgeon prefers. It's me! I'm the surgeon. Dear academia, recognize, people of color professors are asked by institutions, colleagues, and peers to do work that is uncompensated, unacknowledged, and unrewarded. It's been called the black tax or brown tax, e.g., diversity committees, mentoring, etc. A really common experience in the Black and Ivory thread is after working really hard to get into a program or receive a fellowship or promotion, black academics are gaslit by white colleagues. White scholars attempt to minimize or rob black scholars of their achievement by insisting it was the result of some diversity quota. Not only is their assertion harmful and made with an intent, conscious or unconscious, to demoralize their colleagues of color, but it is obviously and painfully incorrect. Another issue that was less obvious to me as a white person is that when it comes to diversity efforts and mentoring, colleges often push this labor onto brown and black faculty members. Even if the college is well-intentioned, meaning that they believe brown and black faculty members are better equipped to produce positive change regarding issues of race, the fact is that the college is asking them to do extra work. Work that takes time from research and studies, is unpaid, and often not recognized. Expectations for faculty of color to lead diversity efforts is so common it has a name, as mentioned in one of these tweets, the black or brown tax. The last topic this video will cover is strategies for bridging these barriers, but since we covered a lot of information in this video, I want to first summarize some main points. Here we see a timeline split up into 4 main sections, representing a person's early education, high school, undergraduate, and graduate school experiences. For each section, I present some example challenges economically disadvantaged and non-white students may face. During their early education, economically disadvantaged students may have less help with their homework as their parents or guardians are overworked, similarly have tired teachers who are overworked, experience non-functioning facilities and equipment at school, have less field trips, may have often irregular meals, and are more likely to be late or absent from class as they must walk or bus. Racial barriers in early education include biased grading and teaching, harsher disciplinary action, and for some, challenges of learning with English as a second language. During high school, economic challenges include less access to college preparatory courses and tutors, potentially needing to care for siblings or earn money for the family, and dealing with the question of is there even enough money for college. Biased grading and teaching at the high school level makes college admission more difficult as students of color are less likely to be recommended for advanced coursework, in general are given weaker letters of recommendation, and encounter cultural bias on their standardized tests and racial bias on the college admissions boards. Once admitted, economically disadvantaged students may struggle with college skills, including how and when to email a professor, office hours protocol, and how to use the various technologies they may not have had access to. All this leads to feelings of imposter syndrome. In addition, family advice and support is likely limited if they are first-generation college students. They have less access to research connections, and lastly, these students may need to maintain a job, meaning that they have less time to study and research. Due to lack of same-race peers and professors, students of color experience feelings of isolation, leading to imposter syndrome. Classroom macro and microaggressions create challenging and sometimes impossible learning environments for students. Then, to apply to graduate school, they face another round of racially and culturally biased testing and acceptance procedures. Once in graduate school, students may struggle with a whole new set of skills like picking a group, talking to advisors, and networking. Additionally, family advice and support perhaps will be even more limited. A similar set of challenges as experienced during undergraduate education faces graduate students of color, with even less same-race peers and professors' feelings of isolation, for example, may even be heightened. Black and brown students may also start experiencing the black or brown tax, as described earlier. Lastly, it should be noted again that even the most established scientists of color will continue to face many of these challenges throughout their career. To close economic and racial gaps in science requires addressing problems at each of these levels. While implementation will vary based on the level being addressed, there are many general strategies which can be applied across the board. For example, battling racial bias via sensitivity and diversity trainings can be applied in both the classroom and the workplace. This is because even the most well-meaning individuals possess socially learned biases which require our active attention to unlearn. As diversity trainings are becoming more common, research has been better able to evaluate its effectiveness. For example, a 2019 study out of Harvard suggests attitude and behavioral changes resulting from one-off diversity trainings are minimal. Instead, others have argued that diversity trainings start the conversation by raising awareness but require follow-up. Leadership coach and author Denise Dennis says that trainings to truly be effective should move on to strategic planning to put actionable plans in place to create change within the organization. In short, for organizations hoping to reduce racial bias, diversity trainings are a good bounce board for pursuing actionable items by starting the conversation. As mentioned earlier, Black students and engineers of Caltech made a list of actionable items as part of their recent anti-racism campaign. I think any organization looking to follow up on their diversity discussions may be inspired by or want to borrow some of their points. Their action items each belong to at least one of 4 general strategies. These strategies being 1. Publish transparent public-facing demographic data. 2. Increase yield of racially minoritized admits. 3. Improve diversity climate on campus. And 4. Vitalize diversity recruitment efforts. In total, they published 13 actionable solutions and identified the offices and individuals with the power to address them. For example, there are many buildings on campus that honor known Nazi and eugenicist scientists, and they are requesting the Board of Trustees rename them in an effort to improve the campus climate. To motivate professors to commit to recruitment efforts, they suggest that outreach be a formal requirement during the tenure review process. This will indicate that commitment to outreach is a requirement to be a professor here. And to increase enrollment yield of racially minoritized students, they request that the President's Office work with the Center for Inclusion and Diversity to establish cohort building programs for students of color. The purpose of cohort building programs is to guarantee incoming disadvantaged students a support network by connecting them to other students of a similar background. These programs usually have a cohort leader. For example, at a college, the leader might be an older student who is more acclimated to the campus and knows the ins and outs. In addition, cohort building programs have group events and programs which usually help students address challenges they may face. I have many friends at Mills, my undergraduate, that were part of a cohort building program called SAW, standing for Summer Academic Workshop. SAW is a 4-week on-campus summer program for incoming first-generation college students to transition to college life before the academic year starts. During SAW, students participate in college course modules in subjects like English, social justice, mathematics, and computer science. The program also includes leadership opportunities and team-building activities. Even after the summer workshop ends, cohort leaders check in on SAW students and host group study sessions. So cohort building can be a great way to create internal support for underprivileged students. I know this has been a really long video, so thank you for watching. I'm going to end it here. There's certainly much more to be said on strategies to dismantle barriers in science, but that was not really the purpose of this video. Instead, my goal for this video was to help myself and others with the first step in dismantling barriers, which is identifying them. It is hard to know what challenges others face when you have no experience with them. In researching for this video, I learned a ton about racial bias, and I'm sure there's also a ton that I missed. I hope you learned something too. When we can identify the challenges others face entering science, we are better able to help. And diversity in science is invaluable because it determines what problems are funded and how research is approached.